What's good with everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Gifted Hoops podcast. It's your host with the most. My name is Gifted, and we are back here for episode 24 of the Gifted Hoops podcast. I think I got this right this time, y'all. If I didn't, let me know in the comments. But I'm joined here today with some passionate Grizzlies fans to discuss the Memphis Grizzlies, their 2023 season, and some expectations for 2024 as well. I want to introduce my guests by saying they're passionate content creators. They work extremely hard, and Bryson and Alex who produce content on the Memphis Grizzlies with their own podcast, Next Gen Grizzlies. Introduce yourselves for the people.
My name is Bryson Wright. You can follow me on Twitter at BrysonWright3. And yeah, I'm a writer and podcaster for Bluff City Media. Make sure to check out the Next Gen podcast. We drop every Thursday. Gonna be dropping on this upcoming Thursday as well with some new Grizzly stuff as always.
I'm Alex Winton. My Twitter user or at name is @AlexWinton_. Obviously, I'm the co-host of the podcast.
Make sure to go tap in with them. Their links will be in the description and the comments below. This is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify, so tap in there. Gentlemen, we're here today to discuss the Memphis Grizzlies. I think the best place to start before we preview 2024, before we talk about the 2023 season, let's start with the end of 2022 for the Memphis Grizzlies and your thoughts headed into 23 in the off season after the playoffs. We can start with Bryson. How did you feel?
Well, things were obviously they ended up losing to the Warriors and they ended up winning the championship. So it's one of those things where I kind of felt like it's taking your lumps. Like all the young teams have, I feel like, the young team that makes it to the playoffs usually doesn't beat the dynasty the first time that they play them. I feel like that's just how it works in the history of the NBA. And there's always like a level that you got to get to. Young teams usually don't make it super deep into the playoffs. They were the second youngest team in the NBA. And they were the 2 seed in the West. They lost to the team that ended up winning the championship. And Ja Morant didn't play the last 3 games of the series. Now, not to say like that they would have won if Ja had played. It could have gone either way. But obviously that's something that you got to take into account. And it really just felt like they were maybe a couple off-season moves away and just a couple years of maturity away. Like I really feel like that's what it is. It's just the main guys being like Ja, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr. just weren't quite ready yet, I feel like. And I feel like that's kind of what we're getting to now is, are they ready to take that next step and really be championship caliber players and, players that go on deep playoff runs every year? Because that's the kind of stuff that the Grizzlies are trying to set up to be right now. But like going back to the end of 22, it really did look like that was going to be kind of the MO, is that they're going to be a playoff team every year. They're a team that's going to win 50 games most seasons. Like that's kind of where I was feeling coming out of 2022, is that they were still on track to do that, but they were probably still like a couple seasons away from truly being ready to win it all. But I feel like at the end of 22, you could kind of feel like they were heading in the right direction.
Yeah, I kind of basically second that. Like, again, like I said it while watching that series at the end of 2022, it's like they did stuff that a young team usually does. And you saw that even in the first round that they played against Minnesota, and even especially in that Golden State series. But like Bryson said, my expectation was like basically before that, or basically that whole time from that year before, they got better each year. Like they went from basically being in the play and losing in the play, and then you had them going to winning the play-in, being in the playoffs, then the next year, that year, winning a playoff round, but then end up losing to the champion. So they kept going on a trajectory, like a good one, to where you thought, okay, well, this is just something that is like the expectation. And so basically, like you felt like the maturity was kind of the biggest thing, just the experience, because again, like they were the second youngest team in the league. So it's kind of like, again, like those teams usually just don't win. And that's not to say they don't win games, but like win big too. And so, for them, they're kind of were in a rare spot, because teams usually that young are bad in lottery teams, but this team was number 2 in the Western Conference and like a top 3 record in the league at that time. So it's like, that's just a crazy type of leap to do. And again, it just takes time. And so basically at the end of 22, I felt pretty good about where they were at. And I just felt like, okay, this is kind of like the expectation, winning 50 games, being a top 4 seed every year. And then, hopefully being a contender to where, you're one of the top contenders in the league in, let's say, like 3 or 4 years. So that's kind of where I was feeling at the end of 22.
Yeah, so for me, I got to give the Grizzlies a ton of credit. And what I refuse to do on this podcast is lie. For me personally, as an outsider, looking at that Grizzlies team, I figured, okay, they're good, but they're young. They might go through some kinks, but they dominated that 2022 season. And the way that they followed it up in 2023, I mean, they were a consistent team, even with guys going in and out. But specifically in 2022, the growth of JJJ and him like really showing how good he could be in spots. Desmond Bane and his, prolificness in that first round. I mean, they show a bunch of promise and heart, and Ja like really showed his stardom and like how he put that team on his back, especially in high leverage type of situations. Because in that first round, like that was such a competitive up and down series. For me, it's still one of the funniest playoff series because you're seeing two young teams just like go at it toe to toe. Who's gonna make more problems, errors, and mistakes? And as good as the T-Wolves were, they had so many times where they just let go of the rope, and Memphis just kept fighting back. They kept showing that heart to come back from down 20 points and win meaningful playoff games for a team that's super duper young, where you have a lot of younger players under their rookie contracts still up to that point. Then you come into the 2023 season where now JJJ signs his extension. And the funny part is you have a defensive player of the year guy, not caliber. He literally won defensive player of the year. In the final year of his contract, he's making $23 million. Like that is an insane amount of value for Memphis. And I've always respected the front office because how they've operated, especially ever since they drafted Ja, they have worked with younger talent, saying, hey, we're going to be a team that is built on depth, defense. Ja's going to lead our units, of course, but we're also going to be financially savvy. We're not going to overpay guys. We're going to trade guys at the right time to make sure we get value back and maximize the current window. And you saw a lot of that in 2023. So obviously that's like, stretching out beyond 22. But as a Warriors fan going up against that team, you saw the difference with like the size. I mean, Memphis for that entire series were super duper physical. And if it were not for the superhuman Kevon Looney's efforts on the glass, it would have been a very tough out for Golden State. And I will say this, as much as I do like Memphis, I am a noted Dillon Brooks hater. I just got to, say that. Seeing him shoot the team out of the series at the end, I was thankful for. I really, really was, because Memphis was a very competitive team, and I got to give him credit for that. But the way that Memphis bounced back from 2022 and said, this is not a fluke, because what most people say, anytime a young team does anything in the playoffs or that first year, they say it's a fluke. They got to do it again. They got to show us that they are legit. And Memphis did it again in the season where JJJ starts the season hurt, right? Desmond Bane comes in producing, scoring like 82 points combined with Ja, I think, versus the Nets. Like, they're playing super good basketball. And then he gets hurt. So now Ja has to do his thing. And then Ja, obviously misses his time. And when JJ comes back, that roster goes from a mid-tier defense to the best defense in the league. And it's not close. Like that's where the Grizzlies were. Tell me what your guys' expectations were, though, before you saw them play any basketball for 2023.
Well, I knew the number one thing I knew is that the team as a whole, I felt like they felt a little bit slighted because of what you said, because, they said, oh, it was a fluke. They're not going to do it again. And then if you remember the last offseason, there was a lot of movement. Everybody was saying the West got way better. The Grizzlies had one fluky year. They're not going to be number 2 in the West again, stuff like that. There was a lot of people saying they were going to be back into play-in. And I really do feel like that was something. And I kind of feel the same way going into this next season as, I feel like they play better when people kind of count them out a little bit. And I think that's what you saw coming into that season. And they really started out like on a mission, and especially Ja, because that first week of the season, like it looks like he might win MVP, because he came out, I think he had like 35 in the first game, 49 in the second game. He was shooting like over 40% from 3 over the first couple months of the season. It kind of trailed off as the season went on, but it was like that start to the season was really like indicative of their mindset to me. And I think it was a really good start. And then, like you said, Jaren was injured. So that was really the thing that worried me the most, was because Jaren is so important to the defense. But when Jaren was out, I think they were like 20th in defense overall in defensive rating. And then, like you said, when he came back, they were number one from when he came back to the end of the season. And I think they finished like 3rd overall. So it was one of those things where just his impact alone was so important on defense. And then just the way that they fought through so many injuries, and then the Ja suspension as well. There's just so much stuff going on. Brandon Clark tore his Achilles, Steven Adams got hurt. Like, there's just so much stuff that was going on that at the end of the season, it was really just, it was kind of remarkable that they were still winning games at the rate that they were, especially when Ja got suspended. Because they were already missing a lot of guys. And then I really felt like, Jaren specifically after the All-Star break on offense kind of just took everything to another level. Because I remember when he got selected for the All-Star team, there's a lot of people talking about his stats. He only averaged 16 a game, whatever. By the end of the season, he was almost averaging 19 a game. So he grew his scoring average by like 2 points over the last half of the season. And a lot of that was just because, part of it was because of the Ja suspension, but they started to play a lot more through Jaren in the post. And I really think that that's something that they're going to have to continue to do, especially early in this next season. But yeah, I mean, last season overall, heading into the playoffs, I knew it was going to be a tough matchup once they got there with the Lakers. But it was one of those things where throughout the regular season, it felt like they had just gone through so much that the fact that they were still the 2 seed was a win in itself, because there's a lot of teams that if they had gone through those injuries, the suspension to your best player, that's something that could cause you to miss the playoffs entirely. And I think it was really just indicative of their depth and everything like that they were still able to be number 2 going into the playoffs.
Yeah. I mean, the expectation for me, again, like I said earlier, it was the same. I mean, even when the Jaren injury news came out, because it kind of came out of nowhere. I think it was like a week before it was like during like free agency or draft. And it just said Jaren had a stress fracture. He's out for
out
like
of nowhere.
4 to 6 months. Yeah. It was crazy because we didn't even know about it. Right. And so it's kind of like a weird thing seeing it. And then I was like, well, because the thing is, I think a lot of people also looked at his older injury when he first came back from it, that meniscus, where in the COVID year, where basically he missed the whole season, only played like 10 games. And, people were worried that he was going to miss a lot of time because, the Grizzlies did say he'd be back sooner back then, but then he never came back until later in the season. So, and again, Jaren's one of your best 3 players on the team. So it was kind of like, okay, even then they gave a set timeline. So for me, it was kind of like, okay, I wait till the schedule to come out. When the schedule came out, I felt confident that they were going to be able to stay where I expect them to, which is basically be a top 4 team in the West, have home court and just stay afloat. And they did. That was kind of really the expectation for me. Bane made a leap again, too. That was really the biggest thing for me, is that even though, they lost Kyle Anderson, they lost Anthony Melton, I expected guys like Ja, Jaren, and Bane to make leap, because, again, people forget these guys are only 23 and 24 years old. Like, there's a lot of growth in their games that still have to be had. And so, I just expect those guys to get better. And then Bane did. I mean, Bane was averaging basically 25, 5, and 5 before his toe got fractured. And then obviously Ja was doing what Ja was doing, just being a great player and really shooting the ball with confidence that first week, as Bryson was kind of mentioning, like his confidence was on another level shooting the ball. And then, as soon as Jaren came back, like he said, it's like Bane got hurt. And so it's kind of like, that's kind of was the start of everything, where it's like, okay, now they got to basically, because they had a lot, I would say there was a lot of different versions of the team you saw like throughout like the whole season. Because you had the first one where it's like Ja and Bane being a high-powered offense, but your defense is not good. Then when Jaren gets back, it's Ja and Jaren, where your defense is better, but your offense is kind of in the middle of the pack. Then you get Bane back for a little bit, and you got your starting 5 for a little bit. Then after that, I think Adams goes down. So it's kind of like, a lot of different things are happening and going on, and in the midst of that, they're winning game. And you know what I mean? And like, you also dealing with the Ja suspension and all that. Like, they still were able to win games, because I think that's just kind of the standard that they've set. And so, it was impressive to see them still win 51 games and still be second in the West, and also being a bad road team, that I might add, because last year they were better on the road and they still were able to win 50 games because they had a big lead for the most part, and they went on a bad losing streak and still were like number 2. So that showed how big of a gap, or how big of a gap that they had over the West. And just I think that in itself is something to be happy about. Obviously, the playoffs, they didn't get the expectation or the end result that they wanted. But I mean, I think it still was just a good season off that you kind of kept your standard going and being consistent. So it was still a solid season overall.
Yeah, and like this for me goes back into my thoughts on Memphis, because again, coming into the season, I figured JJJ missing a lot of time is going to significantly impact that team. I had question marks on like, are these players going to be able to fit, like grow and like be good in the spurts without him? And the fact that they were able to, not be so far in the dumps without him, and then when he came back, they were like the best defense in the league, and you felt like the points just going up and up and up on the board consistently, especially with Bane. I mean, having just a phenomenal start. I mean, like 9 threes a game on like 45% from the floor. Like he was having a ridiculous start to the season. And like the first player my mind goes to is Steven Adams. I'm a humongous Adams fan. Sidebar, that sounds, crazy, but what Adams produced for that team, like the way that he was impacting offensive rebounds, he was in the 94th percentile for offensive rebounds. And the way that Memphis beat a whole lot of teams was straight up effort. We would turn you over, get out, get the offensive board, create multiple second chance opportunities for our unit, and then Bang would be able to space the floor out, and JJJ obviously mans that defense. And by Adams being such a potent force at the 5, he enabled JJJ to have an easier load on defense and be able to roam and really do what he does best on the defensive end. And to me, that was the X factor and why the Memphis defense was so good, because you had size and range, and JJJ was having a ridiculous block rate. And I got to give JJJ a lot of credit too, because coming in, another thing that I said was he puts himself in dangerous situations in terms of foul trouble a lot. And I felt that coming into the year, if he's going to like grow, he's going to have to fix that. And even though I still felt like he had problems with that this season, you saw him find a way to be super impactful and still overcome that, because that's just how good he was at blocking shots. And in the playoffs, which I'm going to just give a slight preview, I was very impressed, because coming in, I picked against him because I thought that his foul trouble would be problems, but he was actually very disciplined, held his own, and more importantly, towards the end of the season, you saw the offense pop for JJJ. And for me personally, that's where I'm at with the ceiling of this team. If JJJ can pop into a way more productive offensive player, it shifts the floor dramatically, because we all know how Ja is one of the best rim pressure guards in the league. If you have JJJ shooting at that clip, at that volume efficiently, it shifts the floor tremendously, especially considering what the load for him is defensively. So for me, all these things came together at different parts of the season. You never got a full from 0 to 82 experience with all of these things together. And the most unsung hero of them all, which I feel terrible for him, Brandon Clark. I'm sorry. I'm a Brandon Clark super fan. And I say that because I remember what he did in the playoffs. Again, like, I wasn't watching as many Memphis games in 22 as I did this season, but in the playoffs, I was glued to my seat every first round, and seeing Brandon Clark just come in and get crucial boards, going up, getting these crazy putbacks. I'm like, he's impacting the game crazy right now. And you literally lost him in the middle of the season to an Achilles injury, and you still had no excuses. Every night it was a next man up mentality, and you guys handled business when a lot of people picked against your team. So again, I have a lot of respect for the season the Memphis Grizzlies just had, y'all.
Yeah, and I will say another thing about Brandon Clark is, you look at the Timberwolves, Brandon Clark was maybe not single-handedly the reason why they made the Rudy Gobert trade, but I feel like he had a really big impact on that, as to where like Brandon Clark was so good on the offensive glass that the Timberwolves thought they needed to sell their future for Rudy Gobert. So that just shows you like how impressive that series was really that last year. And yeah, and I think the day that the Brandon Clark injury came out was like the same day that the first Ja video came out. So it was just like, it felt like that day, it really felt like the season was over. Like, honestly, it felt like the season was over for a little bit. But then, like, even when you do feel like that, there have been multiple times in the past where I felt like that too, and they just continue to prove you wrong. Like, you go back to a couple seasons ago when Ja got hurt and he missed 25 games, and, you know, everybody talks they went 20-5 without him. Nobody expected that. I'm one of the biggest Grizzlies fans there is. When Ja went down in that game, I was like, they're going to struggle. And then, Tyus Jones came in, which I think that's going to be a big missing piece coming up, is Tyus Jones not going to be there. But I just feel like every time it feels like, the season might be over. This is the straw that broke the camel's back. They can't overcome this on top of everything else. They continue to do it and, finish a regular season with a solid record and everything like that. But yeah, I think they miss Brandon Clark and they miss Steven Adams a lot because like you said, he was really important on the offensive glass all season. That's really how the Grizzlies were beating people, was on the offensive glass. They were the number one rebounding team in the NBA for most of the season when Steven Adams was in. And then after that, he wasn't. Jaren just isn't as good of a rebounder as Steven Adams is. And I think that's why Steven Adams is so perfect for Jaren, is because all the stuff that Jaren lacks, he's not super physical. He's getting better at it now. He was much more physical this past season than he had been in the past. But that was one of the things that I think Steven Adams has actually taught him, how to be physical, but also how to be physical without fouling as much, which he does still have some foul issues. But for me, I feel like his foul issues are now more like he charges, like he gets charging fouls and like stupid, like take fouls and stuff like that.
On the offensive end, right. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know exactly what the stat was, but he was pretty, I think he was like top 5 in the NBA in offensive fouls. Like, it was one of those things where that really had a big impact on his fouls as well. But yeah, missing Brandon Clark and Steven Adams really did hurt them. And I think you saw that when they got to the postseason too. Not to say that if Brandon Clark and Steven Adams came back, they definitely would have won the series, because that, that Lakers team was really good. They ended up going to the Western Conference Finals and everything like that. But I think it would have been a much different series if those two were playing.
Yeah, and to add to what you were just talking about with both of them going down with Brandon Clark and Adams, this is another thing that they had to deal with, because they got Luke Kennard at the trade deadline, and I don't even think Luke got to play maybe 1 or 2 games with Adams, maybe if
he
that.
He get to play with those screeners, right? Yeah.
That at all, or play with Brandon Clark maybe a couple of games. And then on top of that, Ja got another, got the suspension during the season. So it's just, you add all that, and you didn't get, like you said, you didn't get to see the full picture of it, and they still won 51 games. Because again, like guys like Jaren and Bane made the leap. Your best players make the, basically got better, and that's how your team got better, And again, sometimes it's all it comes down to some degree, like, because that's usually how it goes. If your top end talent is healthy and playing at the highest level at the same time, you usually got a chance with anybody. That's just usually how it goes. And like with Jaren, just to talk about him, like his season was great, because again, he came out the gates. I think the first game he was struggling like very bad. Like I think he's like 0-8, like it was bad, but he had like 7 blocks, right? And you could tell like he was just rusty and stuff like that. But it was like after that game, literally, like you saw like a shift. Like his defense was there, but like the offensive game he was picking the spots a lot better, and having a better balance of his inside and outside game. And that's really where the growth for his game is offensively. Just knowing that, like he can take threes, obviously, but not to, fall in love with it and basically take them when they're available versus them just settling for it. And I think that's really the growth for him that, like we talked about it before, me and Bryson before, I think we have, but he, like you said about his ceiling, the ceiling for the Grizzlies, I've said he's the most important player for a while. Like and that's not to say he's got to be the best player, but for me, like if he's a guy that's 20, I say the 22 points a game offensively with the all NBA defense.
Huge.
Yeah. What Bane does and what Ja does, that changes your ceiling a lot more. And that's why, I think again, like he's the key, because again, like nobody else really does what he does. Like you don't see a lot of guys that are the defensive player or defense, have that type of capability and average 20 points a game. That's why, when people talk about him as an all-star guy, I was like again, you don't see a lot of guys, because usually those guys are like the defensive guys are like Draymond and Rudy Gobert, and those guys only average like 7-8 points. Now they do more stuff, like obviously Rudy Gobert rebounds, Draymond makes and rebounds and does all that, but you just don't see a lot of guys being able to be that two-way type of force. So I think him showing that was great. Obviously Bane as well, but yeah, they just had again, like guys that were just stepping up, you know what I mean? And that's really just kind of just, again, like I said, it's just a standard. I never really worried about a lot of it, because again, it's just, I'm just so used to it. They exceed expectations every year usually, and it's just kind of thing. And again, they didn't meet the expectation of the playoffs. Again, like Bryson said, it's like, they could, they got hit with the injury bug. And, you could say like, hey, if they have them, they could win, they would have helped. But, you can't say they would have won. But again, it's just part of the season. Everybody deals with different adversities of the season. So it kind of just, was just like the, part of this, the story. So, but yeah, I mean, it was still, a good season. And they, again, met the standard of what they usually do.
Yeah, all teams go through their different trials, and teams, as a whole in general, for the most part, there's different layers to what teams go through. But I think for Memphis, the most interesting part of their season too is like the amount of guys that were just not out at the right time. Like trading for Kennard, who by the way shot lights out, like he was great, without those screeners to provide multiple opportunities, or maybe his gravity frees them up and now it's easier points in the paint. Like you can argue that Memphis team looks completely different if they have all of their guys playing and clicking on all cylinders at the same time. And a player that I got to give a lot of credit to, man, like I said coming in, like this dude is the best backup guard in the league, Tyus Jones. I mean, he was so tremendous in the times where Ja was not on the floor. He produced decent enough half-court offense to sustain things. He didn't make too many mistakes. He shot the ball well. Like he was able to produce very well for this team. And that kind of takes me to like a preview of next year slightly, right? Because I feel like he was so underrated in the impact he brought to this team offensively. With him being gone, the guy that you have in place of him will be Marcus Smart, which I think Marcus Smart is good. I think he's been a phenomenal POA guy. I mean, he literally won his own version of the Defensive Player of the Year 1 year ago, right? So he is good. But in terms of like that offensive value, I do feel like sometimes his IQ and his overall decision making isn't where Tyus Jones was for the Memphis team. But you can make up for that if he is complementing JJJ perfectly on the defensive end. Where do you think Marcus Smart can pick up the slack for Tyus? Because the last thing I'll say is what intrigues me a lot is, as good as Tyus was, you can't really close out that many games with Ja and Tyus because of the defensive stuff. Marcus Smart can actually slide right into those lineups. So what are your overall thoughts on that?
So I think that's actually the reason why they decided to go with Marcus Smart, is because Tyus, with Tyus, they did run some lineups with Ja and Tyus to close those Timberwolves series, and it did work in that series, but that's just not something that's going to work very consistently because of the stuff on defense, like you said. So I think that adding Marcus Smart, you're adding somebody that can play with Ja, because I just feel like as the GM, like you have to have guys that complement your star players well. And as good as Tyus Jones was when Ja wasn't out, he just wasn't as good coming off the bench. And, when guys are healthy, he's going to be coming off the bench. He had to be a little bit, better in that role at times, I feel like. But like you said, when he was a starter, and I think he's a starting point guard in this league. And I really feel like that's one of the reasons why the Grizzlies traded him when they did. They could have traded him at the end of last season, or Tyus could have just walked, but I think they signed him to that 2-year deal, knowing that if they didn't win it all this year, they were probably going to send him somewhere and let him be a starting point guard somewhere else. Like that's really kind of what it felt like last season. But with Marcus Smart, he's not the same level of, I think he's a good playmaker, but he's going to turn the ball over a little bit more. Obviously Tyus Jones led the league in assist to turnover ratio the last 3 or 4 years. So he's not that level of playmaker that Tyus Jones is. And I think that is going to hurt them a little bit, but I think that you're going to make up for a lot of that on defense. And I think you're also going to benefit from playing Marcus Smart with Luke Kennard as well too, because that's somebody who's going to get a lot of open looks out there. And this is also a guy, Marcus Smart, who knows how to play off of other superstar players because he's played with Jason Tatum, with Jaylen Brown. So I feel like he's going to be one of those guys who knows when Ja does come back, how to play with, he might be the fourth option out there, when Ja, Jaren, and Bane are all healthy. And but I think he's going to be okay with that because that's something that he's used to. And I think that that's going to be big for them. And I think they're also going to run a lot of lineups where Smart is basically just going to take over what Dillon Brooks was doing, even though, he's not as tall as Dillon Brooks. And Maybe he can't match up with as big of players, but I feel like he plays much bigger than 6'3". I think everybody can agree with that. And I have no issue with him guarding the majority of small forwards in the NBA if that's who he's going to be guarding. So I think you're going to see a lot of lineups where they're going to go with Ja, Smart, and Bane at the end, and then run Jaren and Steven Adams on the interior. And I think that's a really solid 5 to go with. So I think with Marcus Smart, he's definitely going to help. And then they added Derrick Rose to kind of be the backup point guard as well. We'll see how much he actually has left in the tank. But I think the biggest thing for D Rose is going to be his mentorship with Ja and stuff like that. Just because I feel like D Rose is the type of dude that Ja is definitely going to listen to. Because I mean, when you look at Ja play, you can tell that he got a lot of his stuff from D Rose. I mean, they do a lot of stuff that's very similar. So I think if there's anybody that you could get to talk to Ja and kind of mentor him, I think Derrick Rose is the perfect guy. And I think early in the season, he's probably going to get a lot of reps at backup point guard. But we'll see kind of how that goes throughout the season once Ja comes back and everything like that. But I think at the beginning of the season, that's definitely going to be fine as a backup point guard too.
Yeah. To start about the Tyus and the Smart comparisons, are really just a trade in general. I mean, I think for me, obviously when I first saw it, because of the picks, I was like, because again, I'm so used to the Grizzlies not trading their picks that I was kind of like what? Like it was a weird thing because I didn't know what they were going to trade out when they said Smart's going to the Grizzlies. So I saw it, and then I slept on it, and I was like, I'm good. Because when I thought about what picks they gave up, it wasn't that bad. And really, to what you were talking about, with the lineups and playing them together, I was a big proponent even though it worked in that series. I never liked the Ja Tyus lineups because of the lack of basically the size with Tyus and the defense that he had. And basically, not to say he can't shoot the ball, but he's not a shooter or making enough shots like that. And Ja's obviously more of a slasher. So it didn't really, to me, compensate for a lot of the stuff. So you were basically small out there with no real advantage. Now with Smart, like what Bryson's saying, I've been big on saying, like, look, you need to get guys that can complement your trio. Like, that's what it is at this point. It doesn't matter about whatever, but what goes on after that. Like, if a player doesn't complement what Ja, Jaren, and Bane do, then it's going to be hard for them to have a place on this team. And so for Smart, I think he does that perfectly because now you can slide him in, obviously, at the 2 or the 3. Now, again, I know it's a little bit smaller, which we'll get into later. I have my concerns about them being, that being a starting lineup per se, but I do like it in spurts because, like you said, with Kennard shooting the ball this past year, I think him and Bane, that little combo of lineups last year was like killing teams, basically, like when they were out there on the court together. So now with Smart being out there, I think obviously for the first 25 games at least starting, again, I don't think he's going to be the same playmaker like Bryson was saying as Tyus will. But again, he's a guy that was a defensive player of the year, and obviously he's an upgrade defensively. So, I think he'll be able to fit in, again, because he's shown to be able to fit in with that Celtics team. Because at times, even though you could say he was arguably their third or fourth best, or basically third or fourth best player, there were times where, Horford or Derek White or somebody had it going, and he's basically like the 5th or 6th option. But he was still doing the little things to win the game. So I don't think we have an issue with, per se, Ja, Jaren, and Bane basically, being the main go-to guys, and then maybe a guy like Luke having a night. You know what I mean? Like he'll still be focused on winning the game. And so, I'm not really too concerned about it. I really like Smart in that regard, and obviously just for the locker room stuff, people said that the Grizzlies needed a vet. And so that was kind of just the biggest thing that people said, that they needed more veteran leadership. And I've been said that too. I said that the past year they need a guy, not only a vet that just can be a vet, but a guy that can play with them. Like, it's different to have a vet like a Udonis Haslam that's just there talking, but it's a real big difference when you got a vet like for the Celtics with Al Horford that can still play and play 30-some minutes in an NBA playoff game. Like, it's just a totally different thing. So I think that is what Smart brings. So you got a guy that's been there and done that now a little bit more. And so I think that'll help a lot. So yeah, I mean, and obviously with the Rose thing, I mean, again, another vet, because I think he, will play early on. But again, just like for the Ja comparison, I mean, I really mainly think that is what it's for. Because, Ja looked up to Rose, obviously, as we see, I think right after he got signed, like Ja was talking about Rose or like tweeted something. And again, Ja's been out the, social media because of the whole thing. He came back to say something about Rose. So, he's obviously excited about that, him being his teammate. And, so I think that's just really the biggest thing. about the moves is that they weren't really the flashiest moves per se. Like if you look at them, but I do think they'll have a lot more value off the floor, or they'll have the same amount of value off the floor as they do on the court. So, you know, I was really, once I sat with the moves, I was really satisfied with them.
Yeah, it took me some time to like understand the trade because again, like this was a trade that was already set to be done. It wasn't going to be 3 teams involved. And then very last second, they trade Tyus Jones. But from the Memphis side, again, like I can't, you know, I have so much praise for the front office because they know when to get rid of value before it becomes dead value. And ultimately, I don't think they wanted to pay Tyus long term when they have Bane and all these other guys coming up, especially with the younger talent. And Memphis has always been a roster that, sure, we have our 3 best players, but we also are focused on developing the other players around them, like Asante Aldama, you know, and players of that nature. But speaking of these younger players again, and this is me putting my Golden State hat on, okay? What I remember vividly in the playoffs, okay? Dylan Brooks gets suspended. And I'm saying, damn, he got suspended because they put Zaire Williams in the game. And Zaire was like, he was like, okay, maybe I'm gassing it, right? But I'm telling you right now, I felt natural fear looking at Zaire. I think Zaire could be a really good player. Last year, I'm not quite sure what happened with his circumstances and his overall situation. I heard that he got older. He didn't play in the summer league. What do you think of his place on this team? Is he going to be a guy that gets more time to play and like naturally develop? Or do you think they're going to move on and move in another direction, maybe favoring a guy like Kenny Lofton over him?
So I think that they still have big plans for Zaire. I think the thing that really messed him up last year was he had tendonitis at the beginning of the season. So he missed the beginning of the season. And it really just felt like he might have came back a little bit too early. Because when he came back, he didn't look 100% healthy. You know, he just didn't look like he was really at like, I feel like so much of his game, especially last year, or his rookie season, was predicated on him getting out in transition and stuff like that. And he didn't really get to do a lot of that. And then the other thing is when Zaire was playing really well, like you mentioned, it was when Dylan Brooks wasn't playing. So he was playing a lot more with the starting lineup. So when he was out there playing off of Ja and Jaren and Bane, I felt like he played a lot better because he was kind of in a different role. But then when he was playing more with bench units last year and he wasn't really 100%, and I felt like that combination just really wasn't good for him. And I think that's why, like, near the end of the season, they didn't really have him playing. And I think going into the offseason, they were talking about this summer, the reason that they gave as to why he didn't play Summer League is because he's going through his own kind of rehab process and stuff with his knee, just to try to, like, you know, not to aggravate it anymore. Like, they had a workout plan put together for him to get a little bit stronger and stuff like that. And they were going to put that over playing in the Summer League, especially because, like, when you talk about the Grizzlies, they do have a lot of young players. Like David Roddy had to get minutes. Jake LaRavia was going to be playing a lot. Kenneth Lofton Jr. was going to be playing a lot. They added Gigi Jackson. So it was like there's a lot of guys who play that same position that were going to play Summer League. So in that way, I think they kind of thought that, you know, Zaire isn't going to play that. And the year before, he had played really well in Summer League and kind of showed, I think, what they needed him to show for Summer League. So I think that's why he didn't play. If it was up to me, I still would have liked to see him during the summer just because of, you know, how the season ended. But I will always take health over reps, like, especially at this point. So I think that, especially when it comes to Summer League games, you know, if it's the playoffs, it's a different thing. But, you know, for Summer League games, you always taking health over reps, regardless of what it is. So I think overall, I think it should be good for him. And I think as long as he comes back 100% healthy, I think he has a chance to make a really big impact on this team. It'll be interesting to see how they use him and then, like, what kind of lineups they put him in. Because, like I said, he played a lot better with the starters than with the bench. But and there's a very good possibility at the beginning of the season they do start with Marcus Smart, Desmond Bane, and Zaire Williams. You know, and Zaire Williams starts at the 3. Like, that's a very real possibility. A lot of people have probably said they're going to start Kennard instead, but I think Zaire does have a good chance, especially if he has a good training camp, just because of what he does on defense. You know, he's not the level of shooter and stuff that Luke Kennard is, but I mean, you go back to that series, Steph still scored when he scored, but I felt like he did a really good job as a rookie on the greatest shooter to ever walk the planet. I thought he did a really good job when he had to guard Steph Curry.
He was a real playoff player. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, so it's one of those things where it's like, when you see that, I still think that player is there. I just think the injuries and like the situations around the season, it just really didn't go its way. But I hope that they're not going to move on from him. I don't think they will. Zach Kleiman, our GM and everything, has said that, they believe in Zaire and all that. I know that you can only believe like 25% of what GMs say in the media, but it sounded sincere when he said it, so I think they still believe in him. Coach Jenkins still believes in him. He's going to get a lot of minutes this year. And I think that if he's healthy, he's going to have a really big impact.
Yeah, I was basically saying the same thing. Basically, just in the injury and the confidence. I think they both go hand in hand. I think with him being injured, that kind of just messed up his confidence, and you could tell. And then on top of that, like what Bryson was saying, the role that they wanted him to play versus the role that he was in the year prior was different. So just a lot of different things going on, because to me, how they viewed it, when you get rid of basically Melton and Kyle Anderson, and then you basically didn't make a move outside of that. You wanted Zaire to basically move up to be one of the top 8 rotation guys. Because like you said, to your point, about to go to the playoff series, that game 2, where Josh scored like 47 points, Zaire was like the second leading scorer in that game. Like, not only just defending, but like if Zaire doesn't hit the big shots that he did and doesn't defend the way we're down
breaking shots too.
Yeah, he was. We're down. Oh yeah, for sure. We're down 0-2 because Bane hurt his back in game 1. Jaren was still having the foul trouble and wasn't consistent offensively. So somebody had to get enough points, especially when Ja was like just going crazy. Like, somebody just had to hit big shots, and that's what he was doing. And so, I think, that along with the stretch that he had that rookie year, to me gives me confidence that, there's a player still in there. Because again, I don't think, that especially a guy in year 2 is just done. I'm big on guys. Like, you don't really know what guys are as players until you like really year 4. By the time you get to year 4 or 5, you kind of know what they are. Not to say they can't get any better or after that, but I'm saying like you kind of have a good idea of where they're at. So, I'm not going to write him off after 1 year. Again, I don't think the Grizzlies are either. I think they're going to give him plenty of opportunity to show that he's still the guy they wanted to take at number 10. Because again, in theory, because I was high on Zaire because of the simple fact of, I'm not going to say he's this player, obviously, but I felt like he could do a lot of the things that Mikal Bridges was doing early on in Phoenix because of in terms of how, like, to make shots, play defense, do stuff like that. That's the wing they wanted to have, a guy that basically could provide versatility with size, because he is 6'9", 6'8". He is a taller wing. And so I think that's kind of the vision that they had. And I don't think that vision's too necessarily far off. I'm not going to say he's going to be Mikal, but just doing those type of things as a utility wing, I think is still possible. Again, I just hope he's healthy. Again, like what Bryson said, I wish he would have played Summer League, but I'm not going to trip over it. But I do think there's a chance he could start. That's really my hope. It's him or Jake. I think those are the 2 guys at the wing spot that I really feel like one or both of them really need to kind of basically, show some stuff this year. And I think they'll have enough opportunity to show it. But yeah, I think Zaire, I'm not going to be out on Zaire yet. Like, when you show me stuff in the playoffs, that kind of holds a lot of weight to me, because that shows in the biggest moments you can show up. Like Brandon Clark, to me, like, again, I'm confident that he'll come back and be good, and I've seen what he's been able to do in the playoff. And the same with Zaire. I've kind of seen, and again, it wasn't crazy, but he had a playoff moment. And those little moments matter. Like, every team has guys where they'll have the little moments. And so I think Zaire is still a big part of this team, and I'm hoping that he can stay healthy and really show it, because if he does, that's another person that changes the trajectory of how the season looks. You know what I mean? And not only him, but you got Santi Aldama. Like, you got guys that can change the trajectory if they make a bigger leap than what you expect them to be. So, I do believe that Zaire is still, a big part of this team. So, yeah.
I think the biggest point that you brought up is not giving up on players too early. And I think that, like, there are so many examples of players who are just late bloomers. I mean, Fox just had the best season of his career, and before this season, a lot of people had like these labels and things about how good he was or how good he wasn't, and then he popped this year. Lonzo Ball, a guy who came into the league with a broken jump shot, developed into one of the most valuable assets in the league, which, by the way, Bulls, if he gets healthy and you feel like you don't want him, send him over to Golden State. like nice little 3-and-D wing who can pass. I'm just saying it matches, but I'm getting sidetracked here. I do want to ask you guys this last question before we transition into the playoffs, because again, I am a hater. I want your honest opinion, about Dillon Brooks' tenure on the Memphis Grizzlies and his loss to the team. Your positive feelings, your negative feelings. Give me the real as it pertains to Dillon Brooks as a Memphis Grizzly.
Okay, so Dillon Brooks, I'll say this. Every night you knew that Dillon was going to go out there and he was going to give 110%. I'll give him that. Now, the shot selection was the thing from early on in his career. Even, it wasn't as big of a deal when he was a rookie and when he was in his second year, because the teams that he was on were really bad. And honestly, on those teams, they needed somebody to take the shots, because he was out there playing with like Shelvin Mack as his starting point guard at one time, like his first year. So that's the kind of level of team that he came in on. And I felt like, his mindset was, oh, I can take whatever shot I want. We're a rebuilding team. And honestly, at the time, he might have been the best option until they got Jaren, until they got John, stuff like that. But I just felt like when they added Ja, when they added Jaren, and when they added Bane, I feel like he didn't accept his role the way he needed to. Like, that was my thing. And I think he even said it in interviews, they want him to be a 3-and-D player. He's not a 3-and-D player. Like, he's not a great 3-point shooter. And the thing that he is better at is getting in the mid-range. And he does have, sometimes he can take mid-range shots off the dribble. And he had times where he was really good at it, but he's extremely streaky. So he'll have games where he looks awesome at it, and then he'll have games where he looks horrible. Like, that was his MO, right? Just the whole season. I've said coming out of that Warrior series in 22 that it was probably time for the Grizzlies to move on from Dillon Brooks. That was where I was in 2022. Honestly, going into that trade deadline, I was starting to think about it, because I had a feeling he wasn't going to come back. So even going into the trade deadline last year, I wouldn't have been surprised if they had moved on from him at that point. But just because of the way it ended last year, and really just some of the shot selections and stuff that happened in that Warrior series, it kind of felt like a preview of what happened in the Lakers series, honestly. Like, it kind of felt like that was a preview for that. And I just feel like after the way it ended, they actually, from what I know, they did offer Dillon Brooks an extension. It wasn't as big of an extension as he would have liked. And I think the Grizzlies and Dillon Brooks both knew that. I think the Grizzlies knew that Dillon probably wasn't going to accept it when they offered it to him. But it was like, hey, if you want to come back, this is what we will take you at. And he didn't want that. But I will say, on the other side, I'm happy for Dillon Brooks that he got his money. If the Rockets want to pay him the contract that they gave him, I'm happy for him, and they can keep him over there too. But it was just not going to be in the cards for the Grizzlies when they got to pay Ja starting up this upcoming year, because his extension is kicking in. Starting next season, they're going to be paying Bane like $40 million a year. Jaren is still on a good contract, but he's making more. And
best contract in the league.
Is the best contract in the league, but he's also, if he wins Defensive Player of the Year in one of the next 2 years, he's going to be eligible for one of the biggest contracts in NBA history. So it's one of those things where you got to look ahead at that. And I mean, if you're talking one of the next 2 seasons, I think it's very likely that Jaren probably gets another one. So if that happens, he's going to be, his contract might be up there with Jaylen Brown. So it's one of those things where if you look ahead, there's just no way that you can pay Dillon Brooks what he thought he was worth. And then I think everybody kind of knew that Dillon Brooks was going to go to the Rockets. Like, I was hearing stuff about that at the trade deadline. Like, at the trade deadline, there was some stuff about him possibly going to the Rockets. And I wouldn't have been surprised if they had moved on from him. But I will say, I'm glad that it was a sign and trade. I'm glad they at least got, like a pick. They got Josh Christopher, which we'll see what they decide to do with him. But I always will say I like at least getting something back rather than letting somebody walk anytime. So I think that the fact that it was a sign and trade, I still think that Dillon Brooks does have a good relationship with the Grizzlies, despite the Shams report that everybody ran with. I was at Summer League and I watched Dylan Brooks and Zach Kleiman laughing and having a conversation, 10 feet away from me. It did not look like somebody who had told him, you cannot be back on my team under any circumstances. Like, it did not look like Dylan Brooks felt like the Grizzlies had done him wrong. I feel like they still have a good relationship. And I think that's why you ended up with the sign and trade too. So I think all in all, it worked out okay. Obviously, you wish that it didn't end the way that it did with the Lakers series and the poking the bear and all that. Because I will say, like, watching that post game too, I was very worried. I'll just say that. I did not feel good about that, the statements that he made after that game too at all. And I'm glad that he got his money, and I'm glad that he's moving on to a different team. And I think it was time for the Grizzlies to move on from him too. So we'll see how they replace him this year. But I think adding Marcus Smart, he's basically going to be taking over a lot of what Dylan was doing. And even though he's not a great 3-point shooter, I've seen him make clutch threes in playoff games, which is something that I haven't seen Dylan Brooks really do besides the Utah Jazz series, his first year, his first playoff series, which was if you really go back and look at that series compared to the last couple years, it doesn't even look like the same player. But yeah, I think it's good I think it was time for them to move on. It was time for Dylan to move on. And I think they both made moves. The Grizzlies made a move that is going to be better for them. Dylan Brooks made a move that's going to be better for him. So I think all in all, it all worked out well at the end.
Yeah, first off, I just want to start off by saying I appreciate what Dylan Brooks did for his time as a Grizzly. Again, I always appreciate those guys because, again, they set a standard. They do what they need to do. And for that time that they're there, they have value. You know what I mean? You don't get to where you're at without them. But after saying that, I've been a lot. If people know me, not to say I've been a Dylan Brooks hater, because I'm not a hater of people on my team, but I've been more of a guy that has, that's basically been if you're going to really be, basically what Draymond said to a degree, when you're really going to be a serious team, I feel like he's not going to be a roster. I said that before. I said that a while ago. And it's not because I don't think he's offers anything bad, but to what Bryson was saying earlier about where he started at, and then how the team kind of developed in his role and things of that nature, the Dylan that you ideally are going to see maybe in a different place, we're not going to get in Memphis. It just wasn't going to happen because when you start out on a rebuilding team, basically, or a team that was injury riddled, you get all the shots. That's your mindset. And that was in his early stages as a player. And then on top of that, you basically, by your third season, get to be a starter on a rebuilding team. First year of Jaws, second year of Jaren. And you don't really have to worry about anybody else on the wings or really having structure. And you're getting to take all these shots. It's going to be in your imprint. Like, that's just what it is. But he did figure out a role to be the defender and things of that nature. But it's just like, Jaren, I feel like Jaren, and Bane all got better. And as they got better, he continued to stagnate. Offensively, again, his numbers never really made a jump in terms of his catch and shoot numbers. And so, like they said, like they want him to be a catch and shoot player, but that's not his game. And not only that, I don't think he wanted to accept that role. And again, and I've been a big proponent of the shot selection. I've always said, again, he's a great defender, right? Made all NBA defender, as he should. But in those moments, I remember, like you were talking about shooting out of game. That game 4 against the Warriors, I remember seeing that fourth quarter, and I was thinking to myself, I'm like, I couldn't believe it. I really couldn't believe that was happening in front of my eyes. And I get it. Some people were trying to give him bail because you don't have no job, and then again, bang, bad back. I get it, but even then, it's something about the shot selection and the shot IQ doesn't make up for, the defense doesn't make up for it because every possession matters in the playoffs. Every little shot, every little rebound matters. So when you take a bad shot with early in the shot clock and that leads out to a fast break, that's gonna come back to bite you. And so I felt stuff like that in high pressure situations was going to hurt us eventually. And again, that's not to say that he's the only blame for what the Grizzlies are going through, because everybody has a piece in it. But I felt like that would come back to bite you. And to some extent it did, because a guy like him, he started to take less shots this past year. He started to kind of be in a role, but he wasn't efficient. So what was the purpose? They weren't even guarding him out there in that last series. And so it was kind of like basically, once they figured out they could play Kennard and they were starting to shift him more, put more Kennard minutes in, Nick Kennard gets hurt for that game. I think was in game 5, and he wasn't available for that game 6. And then by that time, it was already done. So, I mean, again, the Dillon thing, I've been a big person saying that, you probably need to upgrade that spot or go somewhere different with a guy that's a better fit if you were really going to be serious. And they did. I think that's what Smarts provides. Again, I don't think, and again, I think to some extent, that's what they hoped was Zaire, obviously, because they took him to number 10 for a reason. And obviously, Jake, like they kind of prepared for this type of stuff. So I'm not, but again, you're going to miss him defensively and obviously what he brought. But again, I do think that it was the right move to do. Again, I've been saying it for a while. I said it after the Warriors series. I might have said it even before then, but I mean, the Warriors series for sure, I was saying after that, like, you got to separate ways. But I don't think they were going to do that because there probably wasn't like a deal out there that made sense. So they're just not going to, again, Zach Kleiman has said he's not going to make a move just to make it. It has to make sense. And so I think now, this time, it actually made sense, especially how it ended. I don't think the antics, because I know people point to the antics and say that's what got him out. No, to me, it's all about the production. What are you doing on the court? What are you playing? Look at what are you producing in the context of it. He just wasn't productive in that series. Like, I think he shot like 30% from the field, 30% from 3. Not only that, you're a defensive stopper, but by the time you get to the end of the series, you got Xavier Tillman guarding LeBron James. You know what I mean? Like, it's just that type of stuff where your role is clearly in front of everybody is getting diminished game by game. And so, I think it was kind of time for that to happen. Obviously, I'm happy that he goes to Houston because I do think he'll help Houston because they are a rebuilding team that needs just guys that set some type of standard. So I think he's good for that role. And obviously, again, somebody's going to pay, congrats to him getting that money. So I am happy for him. And I'm glad we did get some value. I will say getting any value for Dillon Brooks is great in my opinion, especially considering how it ended, I'll say. But yeah, I think it was a great move or a good move to move on from him. So I mean, I wish him the best, but obviously I've been kind of ready for this. So, I'm good. I'm cool on it.
Yeah, man, listen, I'll be honest about Dillon Brooks, right? So does he do good things that contribute positively to franchises? Yes. I'm not going to say that, he's not a plus defender. This is true. But what frustrates me about players like Dillon Brooks is it's almost like because you do this one premium thing so well, that is your leash to take whatever shots you want and limit the offense however way you want, where defenses are not respecting your shot, they're not guarding you, and you're playing into their hands by not thinking about, hey, let me double down on playmaking instead let me just, take these horrible shots. And when I say horrible shots, like, again, I'm a Warriors fan. I literally saw this man in the fourth quarter take multiple pull-up threes unprompted. No one asked him to do that. He's doing that for himself. And then against the Lakers, how he was going 0 for 9 from 3 in playoff games. Like 9 possessions in a playoff game can be the difference between winning and losing by 25 plus, right? Like that's how impactful those possessions are. And I feel like Brooks, in terms of Memphis, because he was there for so long, he had a longer leash because of the positive things he did on the defensive end. I think that doesn't override, though, everything else you contribute negatively offensively. But like we said earlier, I don't give up on players. He is going to be going to a different spot and situation. But what really makes me nervous about this is before he left, I'll never forget when Dillon Brooks said, the next team I go to, I want more offensive responsibility. And I'm thinking, so you want to take 20 shots, not 15. You want to take 20. Like, I don't know what that looks like. All right. So had to get that last.
No, I'm with you.
Yeah.
Because I also feel like he said that when he left, he was like, on the Grizzlies, I was the 4th or 5th option. Then I was thinking about the Rockets, and I was like, they got Jalen Green. They just
it's gonna be the same situation. Yeah.
They just signed Fred VanVleet. Like, they got Sengun, who they're not just gonna not want to go to him anymore. Like, that's already 4 players. And
Jabari?
Yeah, I said Jabari. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like,
Jabari, yeah.
So I don't know what exactly. Yeah, they just drafted.
It's going to be the same spot, and you're saying that you want a higher offensive load on a team that is going to feature their best player Sengun more. Jalen Green is going to take another leap. You have, we literally saw what Jabari Smith was doing in summer league when given more opportunities. So you getting more of an offensive load on a team that also signed Fred VanVleet for a ridiculous contract. I don't see that working if that's going to be your mindset. But again, maybe new place, new face, new coach, much better player. But me personally, I'm just not higher on players like that. I like players that can like fit, add great versatility to where you don't have to say, well, he does this good thing, but all the other things are not really contributing positively to your unit, personally. But we can now transition to the playoffs, actually, because from my perspective, right, I thought Memphis was a good team. I did. But I picked the Lakers against Memphis because the front court depth, I thought losing Brandon Clark and Adams for the series was going to be tremendous versus a revamped team. And sure, they were the 13th seed at a point, but after the trade deadline, they became the best defense in the league that had you guys in it. So I felt like that was going to be hard. I felt that the half-court offense for the Grizzlies at times can look very, very stagnant and sloppy, considering you have players that come in that are not respected by teams, you know, in terms of like three-point shooting. And I feel like for a Grizzlies team that could also be physical, and the fact that they had Anthony Davis who could like switch out on Ja and be productive and just be an insane defender, which to me in that series, AD's defense was like the X factor in like why it was what it was. But that's kind of why I chose against you guys. But I also kind of wish Ja didn't hurt himself again, because he did have a game where he was willing that team. I mean, like 40 points. He was getting to the free throw line all up and down that third quarter, but it always felt like it was slightly out of reach. And then obviously LeBron James dials back a game where he puts up 20 rebounds. What were your perspectives coming into the Lakers series, and what were your main takeaways headed into 2024?
Well, I mean, not to say, like, I thought that they were good enough to win, but they would have had, like, Ja would have had to be amazing. Bane was going to have to be amazing. Jaren, like, those three guys were going to have to all be playing at their best. Desmond Bane wasn't at 100%, which a lot of people kind of did overlook that. He didn't have his surgery till after the season. They're saying he should be back for this year, so that'll be good, back at 100%. And then, not having Steven Adams and Brandon Clark when you're facing Anthony Davis, which, you want to say that Jaren would match up pretty well with Anthony Davis, but I just don't think he's necessarily at that point yet to where he was really ready to dominate on both ends the way that Anthony Davis is. Obviously, that first game, he played awesome. He was going at LeBron one-on-one and had a 30-point game. Like, that was really awesome to see that. But it just really felt like he wasn't as consistent on offense. I felt like at times they didn't look for him enough. And it was kind of in like a weird situation too, because I felt like they had started running that half-court offense through Jaren so much near the end of the season when Ja didn't play. Then Ja came back and they were kind of trying to figure it out. But another thing I will say with Steven Adams is they were out-rebounded a lot in that series. I think they were out-rebounded in every game they lost in that series. Because as great as Xavier Tillman did play, like I think he played the best he possibly could, he's 6'8". You know what I mean? Like at some point you need another like 7-foot guy down there, especially when Jaren has never really proven to be a great rebounder. So I think that missing Steven Adams was really hurt them on the boards. And then it also hurt them in the half-court offense, because I feel like so many times when Ja is getting open looks at the rim, it's either because Steven Adams is setting those really good screens for him at the top of the key, or he's setting screens and basically boxing out, the center who's coming over to help. So then now you have Ja in a one-on-one situation with no rim protector. And I think that's something that Steven Adams does that's super underrated if you watch those games, is that he's always moving the big men out of the way in the paint. So when Anthony Davis is there, he's occupied with Steven Adams in the paint rather than, an Xavier Tillman, who he does as best as he could. And, he did have some good games against AD and had some good defensive possessions to get LeBron, but it was just not enough. Like he's just not the type of player they really needed. And I think just all those injuries, guys not being 100%, and then in game one when Ja goes down and then the Lakers went on that big run, that really I felt like changed the entire kind of trajectory of the series. Because not to say just because of the way that they were playing at the end of that game, I don't think the Lakers would have gone on that super big run if Ja hadn't got hurt. Maybe they still win that game, but it really just felt like winning game 1 the way they did set the tone for them. Even though they did lose game 2, I felt like that kind of set the tone in games 3 and game 4 for the way they kind of came out, because they saw on film, like, this is what we got to do, especially with no Ja, or if Ja's not 100%, to go on big runs. And I felt like that's really what they did to start game 3, game 3, and then that's what they did to start game 6 as well, when they got out to a really big lead. So I think that, missing all those guys on top of, the antics and stuff from Dillon Brooks, I think did have a role in it. I'm not a person who's going to blame it all on Dillon Brooks, but I think that giving the best basketball players in the world even more fuel than they already had is never a good idea, especially when it's LeBron James. Like, you never give LeBron James extra fuel to want to beat your team. Like, that's just not something you should do. But it wasn't all his fault, but there was a big stuff that was on his shoulders. But everybody had bad games. In that game 6, nobody really came to play. And I think that is something that left a bad taste in their mouth. I know Jaren went on the Paul George podcast and he talked about how that is kind of going to be lingering over them the whole season now, is the way the season ended. It's one thing to lose in the playoffs, but it's one thing to get blown out with your season on the line. And I think that's something that is it sounds weird. Like, I really think it's good for him though. Like, I really think losing the way they did is going to be good for him. I think they're going to, take things more seriously coming into the season. There's going to be less antics and stuff going through the year, more business-like. And I think, like I said, it's all about maturity. Teams take their lumps. Like, young teams always take their lumps before they make it to the level that you want them to be at, which is, Western Conference Finals, going to the finals, stuff like that. Not to say they're going to do that this year, but I think it's something that's their goal. And I think in the next couple years, that's where they're going to be. But it takes time. Like, that's the biggest thing I'll say. And they just weren't ready. They weren't ready yet this past season. And we'll see if after, Ja comes back and everything, if everything can click together, if they can stay healthy, maybe they can prove that they're ready this year.
Yeah, for me, I'll say it comes down to really like 3 things. And I'll start off by saying it starts with margin of error, your best players, and shot making and big plays. To start off with margin of error, when you got injuries to Adams and Brandon Clark, and your roster kind of is built or not as deep as you were last year, your margin of error gets smaller because now you're putting guys in position that haven't been in the position to basically provide that same value, like a Santi, like a Roddy, who haven't been in that spot. And now you're putting more pressure on your best players, which is Ja, Jaren, and Bane, to be basically absolute perfect. And be able to to even win those games. And the fact that Bane was still hurt, not only still hurt, but I mean, no disrespect to Bane, but like, you're not going to win a game 1 when Austin Reeves is outscoring you. Like, that alone is just putting you in a disadvantage because your margin of error is already smaller. And then obviously Ja getting hurts you as well. But again, like, they just couldn't make enough shots. Like, if we go look at the series, I think Bane was the best. Bane and Luke, obviously the best shooters, but I think everybody else was like low 20s. Like, Jaren, while he had a good series, I think better than most people give him credit for, because he was able to stay on the floor. And I felt like defensively he was good. Offensively, it was hard because when AD is healthy, he's one of the best defenders in the league. So I didn't expect him to score on a guy like that. No, not saying I didn't expect him to do good, but I'm not surprised that he struggled offensively to some extent or had up and down games. But he didn't make shots either. And again, when I talk about Dillon Brooks, he shot 30%. Then Tyus, he only shot like maybe, I think, 16% from 3. So when you not making big shots, and then not only that, I remember Bane talking about it in the swing game. I'll say swing games. There's swing games in series where, if you lose that game, you probably end up losing. Or that's how I look about it. Like, after the series, you're like, okay, this is probably a game they should have won, or this was the moment where they probably lost. To me, it was like the game 4. At the end of that game, where Jaren got the block, then I think Ja got the rebound and the leak out, and it was a Bane layup. And we were up like 2. And I think Bane talked about it. LeBron went right. Nobody helped on the drive. Bron hit a high arcing layup to go into overtime. And then after that, you were down, you got overtime. But then even then in the overtime, he made a big and 1 and you didn't make the big shots. Like, it just happens. Like, and that's basically the story, because they weren't a good road team. So for me, it's like, if you're not going to win on the road, it's going to be hard. Like, it's going to be tough. So for me, I mean, they still had a chance, but it just was bleak because if a team's already shown you they've been bad on the road the whole year, it's hard to expect them to be better. And so I just think that, was just a big thing in that series. Obviously I think with Adams and Clark, that helps. It gives you more depth. You don't have to play X as much. You don't have to, you don't have to play Santi as much. And not to say those guys weren't good, because I think Santi made shots, but they weren't, obviously you can tell like they weren't always ready or they weren't consistent enough. And you just didn't have enough shot making. That's really what it comes down to, because not to say, I'm not trying to discredit AD and what he did in that series, but when you go look at those clips, you're basically playing you're already playing Ja, who doesn't shoot the ball well. Dylan Brooks is a wing, is not shooting the ball well. X, no disrespect to X, he doesn't shoot. So essentially, right, you got three guys you can play off of, and basically guys are already in the help. When Ja was either driving or Jaren was driving or Bane was driving, but really Ja and Jaren, when Jaren got a post touch, there's already somebody basically at the elbow already ready to help and double, because they don't have to respect Dylan Brooks. They don't have to respect Xavier Tillman. And so that made the offense even more clunkier. And so that was a big part of it. And then again, when you had the open shots, you didn't make them. Like, I know I love Bane, but again, Bane wasn't really great until really game 4 or 3. I think game 4 or game 3 into game 3. And then, again, Jaren was good in game 1, but then had a lower game 2. Then Ja was good. Then Ja was good in game 3. And Jaren and Bane were good. Like, they were never all good at the same time too. And so I think when you culminate all that, I mean, it's just, that's how they lost. And again, I just think, those are the biggest things for me. But I think, again, like he said, Bryson said, it was a good thing to happen, because for a team that's gotten better each year, for them to not make and I'm not saying they had to win the title, but you would think, okay, you made the first round, you were in the first round, lost, then you lost in the second round. You think, okay, maybe we made the Western Conference Finals, and you lose in the first round. You know what I mean? That's going to be a reality check to some extent. You know what I mean? Especially when you realize, even with Adams and Clark being out, you could have won that series still if you won the swing games or you made the key plays. But instead, they made the key plays, and you got to tip your hat. I mean, there's LeBron James and Anthony Davis. These are guys that are top 75 players. And they just made the bigger plays. Like, it happens at the end of the day. But now it's about how you respond to it and how you move forward with it. And that's why Jaren said, and not just Jaren, but Bane, they're sitting with this. Like, this is going to hurt, and it should. And I think, they're going to take that, and it's going to be part of the process. I said it on our pod before. It's all part of the process. Like, people got to realize, like, nothing happens overnight, and teams historically like this don't win this young. Like, give them time. Like, I know it's hard to be patient, especially in today's league where a lot of things, especially in today's world where there's a lot, what microwave era, people expect things just to happen quickly. But go look at the Nuggets. They were in like year 8, year 7 of Malone and Jokic and Murray. Like, it took time. Like, it takes time. And even with Giannis, I think it was like year 6 or 7. Like, it takes time. People got to understand that. And I don't think people understand that, especially with the Grizzlies team, where I think, they're ahead of schedule, even in spite of that. Like, teams historically like them don't win 50 games every year. And they're doing this in spite of all the stuff we already talked about, like all the adversity and stuff. So imagine when they actually now, where apparently quote unquote got humbled, now they're going to be serious. Like, you know what I mean? And healthy. Like, I would, not just count them out so lightly. So I do think it was a big thing. I think it's part of the process and part of the plan. You're just not going to win every year. No, it's a journey. It's ups and flows. It's not going to be, I think Zach Kleiman said it, progress is not linear. Even though it's never linear. So for them, they understand that. And I think they're going to, they approach that offseason like that. And I think their mindset going into the season is going to be a lot better. And they'll be better for it. You know what I mean? I think the moments that they had last year where they lost the series and you're the number 2 seed, that's going to help them for when they're in that moment next year or the season after, where they're playing a team that maybe had the same type of, players on it, and they make the big plays this time. And they do that because of the experience of failure last time. So, that's kind of where my expectation was. I thought we could still win the series and we didn't. But I mean, it happens. It's not like it's the world is falling. Like, it's on to the next season and you bounce back from it. I'd be more worried if they were like 30 years old. They're all 23, 24. So I'm not going to be concerned over one loss. Like, again, it's all part of the process. So, it looked better in 3 or 4 years when they are one of the top contenders if everything goes right. So, yeah.
For all the NBA fans listening to this podcast, moral of the story is trust the process. Had to get that little Harden shot out in there. Just the process. But
for real.
But yeah, like they are a young team, and I think the best point you made was we live in a microwave era where we just expect results so quickly. Like people want Devin Booker to win a championship 3 years ago, right? Like, why is he not winning? Why is he not winning? And then literally 2 seasons pass, and then they win 64 games, and they're one of like the best teams, and they play hard. Like, it takes time to win in the NBA for a lot of teams. And I think the way Memphis is going about it is they're trusting their development, but they're also not making critical mistakes in terms of overpaying guys or not trading guys when they need to at the right time. Memphis is still hitting those home run types of deals in your front office. And the guys who are supposed to be in charge of managing and making sure that this team has success in the future is the front office. Their job is literally to understand that it takes time, but their job is to evaluate what will accelerate our process, what will decelerate, what will keep us steady on our path. And I feel like so far Memphis has shown time and time again through their savviness that they're able to build around those margins and be a very competitive team who has no quit and no excuse. And honestly, a lot can be made of the Ja Morant stuff. I mean, obviously he's going to miss 25 games, but you could argue that's a great thing for Memphis because now he's not going to be eligible for All NBA, and that's going to be less money you have to pay all the way out, which potentially makes your team better. That's one positive. Obviously, we don't like, seeing him not be there to play basketball, but that is a thing. And as a Warriors fan, seeing Steph win an MVP making $12 million, I mean, there's things. And that ultimately led itself to us having KD, right? Like, these things add up, and you never know what happens with the new TV money and things changing in the future. So I think Memphis is in prime position for that. I feel like last year was a bridge into the new era because pretty soon Steph, LeBron, KD, all these great dudes are going to be out of the league, and the futures of like a Ja, a Bane, a JJJ, Anthony Edwards, a Jason Tatum, all of these guys coming up, they're going to be the guys we look at now in the next 4 to 5 years. Like, this is the league. This is the future. This is now. So for Memphis, they're taking the right steps to get themselves in proper contention. It's a process. Appreciate that. Not the Philadelphia process, but it is indeed a process. Now, the last question I want to ask you boys in here for the 2024 season, considering that Ja Morant is going to miss the first 25 games, considering you have multiple players who are going to have continuity coming into next year, I'm not sure if the timeline on Adams is that he'll be ready to play once training camp begins. What are your expectations headed into 2024?
So for now, it seems like Adams should be back. Obviously, missing Ja at the beginning of the season is going to be tough. But I think as long as they stay around 500, maybe a little bit above 500 with Ja out of the lineup, I think they'll be okay. And I don't think that's too far out of the question when you consider the way they've played the last couple years without Ja. Obviously, it's a little bit different of a roster, and it's not going to be Tyus Jones running the show. It'll be Marcus Smart. But I do think that they're going to have enough to win regular season games without Ja. And I think that when Ja comes back, and once they kind of, it's going to take a minute for, Marcus and Ja to kind of play together and stuff like that and play off of each other and, learning where guys like the ball and all that kind of stuff. Like, that's going to take some time. But I do think that, when they're fully healthy, they're going to be one of the better teams in the Western Conference. Like, that's my expectation, is that, they're not going to be worried about the play-in at the end of the season. Like, that's really my expectation. They're top 4, top 5 team in the West. They probably won't be number 2 again, just because, Josh missing the season and stuff like that. But I also said that last year because Jaren was missing at the beginning of the season. I was like, I think they'll make the playoffs, but they probably won't be 2 again. And then they were 2 again. So, but for me, I think as long as they are, top 4 or 5 seed in the Western Conference and are healthy going into the playoffs, I think the expectation should be to be a contender. Whether that means, getting out of the second round and going to the Western Conference Finals or going all the way or stuff like that. Not to say that it's win or bust this year or anything like that, obviously. But I think the expectation is to take that next step and kind of prove that you're a contender, because I feel like a lot of people wanted them to prove that last season and they didn't. So I think that should be the goal for this year, is to prove that you're a real contender, and really just see what you have in some of these young players too. Like, what do you really have in Zaire Williams? What do you have in Jake LaRavia? I want to see them play Kenneth Lofton Jr. just to see, what can he actually do on the NBA court. You see a lot of him in Summer League and the G League. I think he's deserved at least a chance to show what he could bring to an NBA roster. So I think that's another thing I want to see, and my expectation for the year is that all the people that you really had questions about last year that didn't play a lot, they're all going to play a lot more. And I think at the end of this year, we're going to know more about, if what they're going to do with Zaire moving forward, what they're going to do with Jake LaRavia moving forward, if they're going to decide to consolidate and, trade for, maybe a bigger name, even if that's a bench player, or if it's somebody else to join the starting lineup. So I think that the expectation should be to kind of prove that you're a contender. But if not, it's also to see what you have in all your young players. So yeah, but I'm excited for the season. I think that the NBA as a whole is as wide open as it's ever been. So I think that's one thing that I'll take as a positive for the Grizzlies, is that, last year you saw, the Lakers were a 7 seed that made the Western Conference Finals. Obviously not a normal 7 seed, but 7 seed made the Western Conference Finals, and 8 seed made the finals. Now they didn't win it, but I think that gives, especially as somebody who's a fan of the Grizzlies, some hope to be, if they're healthy, even if they are a lower seed, they could have a chance to make a deep run if it all plays out the right way.
Yeah, I think the expectation for me is probably, how can you go from being a lower tier contender? Because I always say you got higher tier, the top tier contenders, lower tier contenders. How can you go from a lower tier contender to being a top contender? And I'm a big NBA historian type of dude. So, I don't, I love my team, but I always go by the stuff that we've seen from the last championship teams. Do you got a top 10 offense? Do you got a top 10 defense? Do you got an all NBA defender? Do you got all NBA player? Like all those little things I look at. And the Grizzlies fit a lot of those qualities. I think the big thing for me is the wing spot. In terms of the expectation, that's going to be the biggest thing, because while I do like, that they can play small, I don't think that's ideal in terms of the postseason. They'll win regular season games. I'm not worried about that. But historically, you don't see teams usually play a guy that's 6'5" at small forward, 6'4", 6'5", small forward, and then you got a 6'4" two guard. Like, it usually doesn't happen, because even last year with the Nuggets, they had Bruce Brown out there. He didn't start the games, he finished them. And I'm cool with that, you know what I mean, playing in the spurts. But so that's why I'm big, hopefully, on Jake or Zaire taking the lead, because they do have versatility with size, or shooting with size, potentially. And so I think that's the big thing for me, because I do expect them to be a top 10 defense, obviously Jaren and being one of the best defenders in the league, and Smart being one of the better defenders. They're going to be a top 10 defense. Offensively, I think they'll be better just with chemistry, having more guys that fit what they do. I think they'll be a top 10 offense. Obviously, the questions will be the half court, still to some extent, which I think a lot of that, I'm not going to say it's not only just the players, but the coaching as well, getting better schemes, running stuff through your best players. I think that kind of is a big expectation too, or a thing, to fix that. But overall, that's kind of the biggest thing. I don't worry about them winning games. Like, I think they're going to be the top 4 seed again. Like, until they show me otherwise that they're not going to be, I don't have no reason to believe why they would. Because what they're dealing with Ja out for 25 games, they've dealt with the last 2 years with something at the beginning of the season. They started out 9-10 the year of the 21-22 season, and they ended up winning 56 games. Then last year, like we talked about with the Ja, Jaren, and Bane not really playing a lot of games together, missing a lot of games, and at points, and still being able to win 50 games. I'm not worried about that. It's really more so, how can you translate to the playoff atmosphere? And that's what they've been focused on. That's why they got Smart. I think that's a big move. But I think, again, like what Bryson's saying, you kind of, by the end of the year, you hope to see what you got with your younger players, like a Santi Aldama and like a Zaire, like a Jake, David Roddy, those type of guys, if they're going to be part of the future, or they're going to try to make a move for a guy that's more of a vet guy. And I'm not saying they're going to trade everybody, but obviously they'll, like you said before, they know when to cut stuff out. Like, they do it every year. They know when to make moves. They do it literally every year. They did it when they realized JV wasn't that dude. They traded him for Adams. Then the year after, they were like, okay, we need to do better with the half court. So we had to get rid of Kyle Melton. This year they did same Dylan Brooks. So they're going to make a move. They're going to improve their roster. They're going to do it again. I don't expect them not to do it again. So I think they'll do it again by the end of the season. But your hope is that they can at least still have a better showing than they did last year, right? And I'm not saying they, like they could easily go to the second round and lose. But if you lose to a team that either wins the championship again or goes to the finals, you're not going to really trip. As long as you're not, you look like you're going in the right direction. You know what I mean? And so I think that's really kind of my expectation. And I mean, I think they'll meet it. Again, I think, a lot of the stuff that I think last year was a good reality check for them and, a reminder of like, hey, we got to do this stuff and really, we can't skip steps, right? Like going back to the process, you just can't skip steps. And so, they might have had a feeling of, well, okay, we're doing this a lot earlier, so we can kind of not, focus on the little things and, be consistent with that. When in reality, you got to do that regardless. You know what I mean? Like and it does not just about your play, but just how you carry yourself and how you act. I think that's what they have to be better at, being consistent at, and just being consistent. The hardest thing in this league is being consistent, like for anybody, like it's hard. And so, especially for young guys that are still trying to figure their games out and stuff like that and be leaders and stuff like that, I think that's the biggest thing. But, my expectation is for them to be a top 4 team in the Western Conference. And then see where they're at. Hopefully you get health again, because a lot of luck goes into being a contender and winning championships. We didn't have that luck last year being a healthy. Basketball guys got to do right by you, all that. A lot of stuff goes into it, but I'm just hoping by you be top 4 and be healthy and then see where it goes. You know what I mean? That's kind of my expectation. And then you'll see where you're at by the end of the year. But the future of the Grizzlies is still great. Again, your best players are all under 25 still, or one is 25, and the others are going to be 24. So it's not, the sky's not falling. Like you still have time and a window to fix the margins around them to get them to a top tier contender. So, I'm expecting a really good season for the Grizzlies for sure.
Yeah, for me, I've gained a lot of respect for Memphis because, again, like year after year after year, they just found a way to persevere, fight when people count them out consistently. So I do have to give that credit. For me, it's extremely hard to call the West. I mean, we're talking about legitimately 10 good teams and only 8 can make it. 10 like good, like Mavericks, Timberwolves, Kings, Clippers, Lakers, like that's just off the top of my brain. I'm giving you those teams and they're like, damn, those are all good teams. Even the Pelicans, who like face injury problems, when they were healthy at a point, they were the number 1 team, right? So like there's a lot to go here, but I think for Memphis, what they built their identity on has always been defense, effort, running, and just, out efforting these teams on the glass night in and night out. And I think that if Adams is indeed ready to go, you get a guy that contributes well to what they do. He can finally play with your spacer that you traded for. And now you have JJJ once again slotted into a optimal role defensively with Adams, which will mean you start out with a great defense from jump. On top of that, you add Smart, who's going to add POA defense to where, sure, he might not be as physical as Brooks is, fine, but he does switch out on guards better. I think he has more IQ and he can fit into that unit well, especially if he has JJJ behind him, which Smart has never had someone in the front court behind him at that type of caliber level. So to me, the build is defensive first. And ultimately, if your build is defensive minded first, you can go pretty far as long as your offense isn't horrendous. And I do think Bane showed great signs of growth last year. So even if Ja is not there, seeing him operate more inside of those ball handler scenarios, you could see some good positive offense. And Smart, very underrated. He was like the 3rd ball handler for the Boston Celtics a lot of the time. And most times, even when he wasn't shooting, he was playmaking and doing that at a pretty solid level. So to me, playmaking by committee, but hanging your hats on the defensive end and getting out in transition and using your youth and your size as athletes physically against every other team in the league. That is the identity of what the Grizzlies are. And that's why they're probably going to have good regular season success. I'm not going to spoil my preseason predictions. That will be coming at some point after I get through with all 30 teams on the podcast. But I do believe in the Grizzlies, and I'm pretty sure I will have them making the playoffs because, I mean, they've shown it time and time again. And at a certain point, when you keep proving somebody wrong, how many times can you choose against them? I'm not sure. But I say that now, seeing these 10 teams on paper, it's very, very difficult. But I gotta say, man, shout out to y'all. This was a great podcast, an hour and 30 minutes in. I feel like we really talked and dissected some high level hoops. For everyone listening to the podcast who made it this far, go tap into these guys for the Grizzly Bear Blues. They do a lot of great work, and also specifically Next Gen Podcast. I want you guys to go tap in to their channel. I've been watching a lot of their content back on Spotify. These guys are still producing content in the dead season. And right now, a lot of creators, y'all know this for sure. A lot of creators, okay, we're done for 3 months. We'll come back when it's September, October-ish. But we're still going right now where there's no basketball. If that's not dedication, I don't know what else to tell you. So again, make sure to follow these dudes. Links and all that will be in the description. I want you guys to also get the opportunity to get those socials out one more time for the people.
Yeah, for sure. You can follow me on Twitter at BrysonWright3. And yeah, follow Bluff City Media on Twitter too. You can just look up Bluff City Media, and then it'll be BCM_Grizzlies is for all the Grizzlies content coming from Bluff City Media as well. So you'll see clips from our podcast and stuff on there, and it'll also give you the links to our YouTube channel and everything like that.
Yeah, my ID or my Twitter is @AlexWinton_. Instagram is _AlexWinton. You can go to either one of those. I talk about Grizzlies. I post links there. Really most of them mainly Twitter. That's really where I'm at a lot of the time. So, but yeah, no, I appreciate you having us on, man. This is great. This is definitely great. Very productive conversation.
Sure. I appreciate you. Hey, definitely taking the spot of favorite Warriors fan of the Next Gen Podcast. No question.
Yes, for sure. You cool with us.
Hey, listen, I appreciate hearing that. If y'all ever want to talk hoops again, just hit me. I'm down to always be supporting you guys. And also, like, make sure when you go check them out, download the audio versions. That helps out the creator a lot. Trust me, I know, considering that I'm trying to launch this and create a level of consistency. Appreciate everyone who made it this far on this episode of the Gifted Hoops podcast. Make sure to tap in on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and also YouTube. We just hit 1,000 subscribers. We're almost at 1.3K. Listen, it's been a crazy offseason. I've been grinding full 10-hour jobs, but I'm scheduling out the content. I'm working through a lot of things, and the support that you guys have given me has been great. So big shout out to these people. Make sure to follow them, and we'll catch you guys in the next episode of Gifted Hoops. Peace out, people.